Hi again. Okay, I've mixed up the palette, getting ready to start this painting. So, as I said in the drawing phase, my thoughts about what would be appropriate as a palette for this are largely cool colors. I want this to be a winter scene. So what I'm beginning with is good old cobalt blue. I also have mixed up some teal, cobalt teal, so sort of a greenish blue. And then I'm trying something different. This is a lunar violet, so it's a grayish violet, very granular, sediment based. I think that's okay as far as a wintry palette. One of my favorite combinations is cobalt teal with actual violet. So I have here a little bit of, this is a mineral violet by Holbein. So I'm going to try this out just on a swatch here. But toggling from this teal into a violet is one of my favorite color combinations. I use it quite a bit for clouds, fog, mist, watery, atmospheric effects. And I think because this is intended to be a winter view in the evening, I think this is sort of the general way I'm going to go. There'll be other colors too. I have ultra blue when I need to get darker. I have some manganese if I want to get a little fresher. Lavender because I always have lavender. Obviously my full range of warms is there at the ready, and I may leaven some of this cool tonality with some warm tones as well. But dominantly, I want this to be a cool painting, a little bit dark. Again, the only real source of light is going to be here. And for now, I'm just going to try to paint around that untouched and leave it just pure white. Near the end of the painting process, I may choose to put a little bit of yellow or pale orange or some warmth on the window if I think it needs it. Probably it will, but for now I just have to preserve it. Okay, I'm painting, as I said earlier, on a piece of Baohong, Master's Choice. It's not a large painting, it's only a quarter sheet, so a little bit more than a quarter, but not much. It's 15 inches by 12. I'm painted on a very tilted board, about 35-40 degrees from the horizontal, so that I can use gravity as much as possible as my friend to help pull the washes down the page. But if you've seen others of my videos, you know that I'll be turning the board around a lot using gravity. It's frustrating to watch, I know, and I apologize in advance. But gravity is one of those tools we have as artists, watercolor artists, that's not employed enough, in my opinion. I think it's a very useful tool. So I'm just building up, this is just cobalt teal. This bead of water that I'm pulling down the page is a very traditionalist French wash, graded wash. Again, I want a little bit of light in the sky, so I just started with pale cobalt teal. Now I'm washing it down into the combination of this lunar violet with a little bit of mineral violet dropped in. And I can wash over everything. Everything's going to be not white, with the exception of this one window, our our focal point. Could I use masking? Yes, I could. Do I? No, I don't. Probably dumb. Not always dumb, but I think in this case might have helped speed the process up if I just masked out where I want the light, but it's okay. It's not that hard to cut around. Here on the porch, I don't know if this is going to remain pure white, but I do want to maintain a little blob of light there. Everything else gets washed over. This will all become significantly darker before I'm done, so there's nothing to worry about. As we get down away from the sky into areas of trees and some of these outbuildings, etc., I can afford a little bit more variation and texture, I think. So just because it's available, I'm dropping in some of this cobalt blue just to add a little bit more variety, but also a little bit of texture. The only other bit of light I want to save is a little bit of streaks on the snow. So I have to quickly and cleverly figure out a way to do that. Again, they're not going to be nearly as light as the window up top, but I think I'll use a little bit of Naples yellow. Yeah, this, and some dry brushed, some just hopefully not overly aggressive, but some subtle sparkles of light perhaps on the snow. I think that will work. And then as we get over here, away from the light, a little bit more of this lunar violet. While the painting is wet, it's a great time to play around in the water with these wet in wet effects. So I'm just really just dropping tone in indiscriminately. I'm not painting things or areas. I'm just adding texture and value where I know I'm going to be needing it. And allowing the gravity and the wetness of the paper to work to my advantage. And then over here, just blend all this out. That effect on the snow is pretty much what I want, so I'm hoping I can protect that as the painting goes along. So when you do these graded washes, you're going to end up generally with a bead of water at the edge of your painting, and that, as it dries, will leach back into the wet wash and cause blobs and streaks. So I'm siphoning it off with a dry paper towel, not because I'm neat, but so that it doesn't backwash and cause me trouble later. All right, so far so good. I can see here where I dropped in some darker tones, some bleeding, similar to what I was just talking about. And if you missed that, just clear water. Not too much, but just a little. That should help those areas blend in together more organically. shouldn't be a problem. Here you can see I probably went a little overboard with the water spray. But you can play around with gravity and encourage that wet wash to run in a direction you want it to rather than in one you don't. So because that's still so wet, and actually increasingly wet over here, this is concentrating. This is a smaller mop brush, one of my brushes, a Neef 118 series. Great brushes. And I'm using the point of it primarily at this stage to just drop in a little bit of French Ultra blue, so a deeper blue with a little bit of that violet gray. Wet in wet, obviously, to help imply these very, very distant trees. I love this wet in wet work, but it can be a little harrowing because you can't control it very well, except by using gravity. That's probably the best tool you've got. If the paper underneath is too wet, it's just going to run off. But if it's an early stage of drawing, you'll get some of these nice effects, these what I call intentional blossoms, where of course the paint will spread out a little, but what you end up with is nice soft edges that help imply that these trees are far away and also vanishing into the wintry evening, so a little bit difficult to see. That's just the effect I want, where they really just melt into the sky and vanish. I wasn't going to, but I think I'm going to try to introduce a little bit of green. This is a jadeite green. I'm mixing it in the palette, which I normally don't do, but I just want to gray it out with a little bit of this lunar violet to drop in to subtly suggest some of these landscape elements that are a little closer in, to build up some of those layers of perceived distance. Yeah, I hadn't intended to use any green at all, but I think it might actually help add another level of interest to all these cool blues and violet blues. What I don't want to do is get too specific, like this is starting to look here. Not too worried about it. I'm sure I'll glaze over it, but yeah, all this stuff needs to really vanish into the mist. I think it'll be fine. What I don't want is this hard line under, but I don't want to get rid of this subtle glow from the Naples yellow. So turn the page this direction. Use a little bit more violet. Just knock back that hard line. And then do sort of a dry brush mark over. That'll encourage the bottom of these trees to melt into the snow and the shadows. Reinforce my subtle light glow, and all should be well. So you can see the way I'm painting. I have a plan, but I have to leave room in that plan for changes, improvisations, adjusting as I go. Things happen in watercolor, always things happen you don't expect. Sometimes they're very good things, sometimes they're very bad. And I think the key is to be able to identify in the moment if something that you didn't plan is a horrible mistake or an opportunity that you didn't notice before. But overall, initially, I like the way that the sky builds into the trees in the distance, into the slightly closer tree, into the slightly closer still foliage, and then melts into the shadowy landscape. Obviously, I don't want a hard edge between the house and the trees, but I do want a subtle edge of the shadowy house against the sky. In order to get that edge to hold, I need to wait till the sky is dry enough, which I think it is now. And it's a good time to do it because I can bring the tone down and hopefully blend it into those wet trees below so that I don't have a hard edge here. So I'm just going to use some violet. It's less about color, more about tonalities. I think I'll tone that violet down with a little bit of the lunar grayer violet. I'm using a flat, half-inch flat brush. The reason is so that I can do some of these dry brush marks that are so characteristic of flat brush work, but also allow this effect of things just sort of vanishing into the atmosphere, sort of there, but not there. Harder to do that with a very floppy mop brush or a round brush that hold more water. A flat brush tends to hold a little less, so you can get some of those nice characteristic marks. Yeah, and I like the sort of idea that I can work in some sort of random sparkles of light, subtle half light, nothing too specific. But not too many of them. Here I'm dropping in more of the lunar violet around the focal point window because I want pretty much the maximum amount of contrast here. But I want to work rather quickly so I can blend this house, edge of the house, into the landscaping down here. And not end up with a hard line. Yeah, it's working. Not bad. Again, this dries fairly quickly, so I want to keep it wet and in motion. I'm cutting around the porch area because the light's going to be on there, so there'll probably be a light shift that I'll want to take into effect. There's this large overhanging tree which is going to obscure much of the house here. So I'm just going to feather this out with just clear water for now. I want to address something right away, which is the edge of this house. I like being a little more obvious, but I think it's a little too obvious. So before it dries too much, I'm going to mist it here and there to sort of knock it back, fuzz it up a little bit on purpose. I think the painting is going to want a little bit of clarity there, but secondary to this. But I thought it had a little too much, so I think softening the roof edge and letting it just melt into the sky, encouraging that effect with a paper towel. So what we will end up with, hopefully, is a house that just sort of comes in and out of focus. All right, it's working. Again, there's a large tree that's overhanging this corner of the house, but I'm going to just scrape in a little bit of identity of the structure because it may show subtly behind the tree. Not much of it, so I don't need to stress, but a little bit. Just assessing how I think I'm doing, if anything. Well, before it dries too much, am I okay with these white sparkles on this roof? I think I am. I hadn't planned them, but I like this, and I think these are okay. I could get rid of them because it's still quite wet, but I think they're okay. They're subtle. I think when it dries, they'll be subtler still, but they look like sparkles of light or bits of snow perhaps on the roof. Yeah, I think it's okay. So I'm just going to leave them. This portion of the house will get darker as it dries, so it'll look subtly more forward of that. So I want everything on this part of the house to be even a little more subtle than this. This will pop forward just a little bit. Again, I want to keep those effects minimal because this is not a house portrait, and I want all those architectural details to be there, but subtle and understated, less specific than it would be if I were doing a bright cityscape or street scene. Now's the time where I want to put in this dark overhanging tree because it's one of the last big compositional elements. I want it a little darker to look a little forward of the house, but also I want to do it now because this is still a bit wet, so I'll have a nice, hopefully, combination of lost and found edges. Part of me would be tempted to do it in green, but I think that would be a false move. It's supposed to be winter. If this were a pine tree, I could do that, but I've decidedly not drawn a pine tree, so this is just some of the lunar violet with a little bit of darker French ultra dropped in. Intentionally doing it before that dries so that I end up with purposefully softer, less distinct edges. Here and there where the paper's a bit drier underneath, you'll get some found edges, and then mostly you'll end up with these lost edges. And I think for the kind of painting I'm doing, the story I'm trying to tell, that's appropriate. Also, if it's not a pine tree, a deciduous tree, it's not going to have all of its leaves, so I don't want to imply that it does. I'm just trying to draw twigs and those little dead leaves and tree particles that cling, and not get too hung up in specifics. It's okay. thing is I need this shape, so I have to make it a slightly more fulsome tree than I would normally. And if I just painted a bunch of twigs, I'm afraid it would draw too much attention and look too focal. Generally okay. I think shape-wise, value-wise, it's right. Identity-wise, it might look too much like a tree with too many leaves on, but I think I can get away with it. So this amount of clarity I think is about right. As this comes down, I want it to meld into the rest of the house. So I'm going to keep moving to make sure that happens. So again, this is just a little bit of ultra blue with some lunar violet mixed in. And I'm going to try to turn the corner on the house and then melt it into these outbuildings and other elements that happen out here. Yeah, it's okay. I don't think I need to worry, but I'm not sure that effect is working. I think it's going to be fine. This wet and wet stuff is very harrowing. You really have to just take a deep breath and let it go, because it's going to do, you can plan and imagine what it's going to do, but you're going to be wrong some of the time at least. I saved just a little thread of light there so I can just subtly suggest the corner of this outbuilding with some deeper tones, and I think, yeah, that's sort of the effect I want. I definitely want more value here to help frame, but also to subtly establish the sense of foreground. But always reminding myself, this is not a typical painting where I want to be a little bit more explicit about what we're seeing. It's kind of the opposite. I want to be less specific about what we're seeing and more specific about the emotional impact that those things might have. So to that end, I'm trying to be more vague, more suggestive and gestural than I might normally be. For some reason, I've decided to do some negative shape painting on this fence that abuts the outbuilding. I think here it's going to get darker, here I'll keep it lighter. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I think it will be. I don't want that much clarity, so as this dries, I will fuzz it out a bit, but for now I think that looks pretty good. And the rest of the edge of the painting, I'm just going to use darker tones and blend them in. This is, again, just this flat brush, 1/2 inch Escoda Versatile brush. I could wait, but I think maybe I can do it now. I'm just going to brush up from the bottom over some of that fence. So it's a little more subtle, a little less explicit. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, I love this effect. It cools these blues and grays all blending together, where there's a little bit of clarity poking in and out of the shadows, but largely it's lost in the shadows and mysterious, so that's what I want. What I don't quite love are the amount of edges showing up here. I want that to be softer. So I'm gonna encourage it to do so with a little bit of water. It's not too dry yet, so that should fuzz those areas up a little without losing them altogether, so they blend. I think one thing it needs up there maybe is a little bit of leavening with teal. So into some of this wet, I'm dropping in a little bit of this cobalt teal into the violet gray, just to enhance what I feel is that wintry palette, that wintry atmosphere. Doesn't need a lot of it, but I think just a little of that teal really brings the violet alive in a subtle, wintry way. All right, I think I should back off that now. Yeah, looks fine. There'll be a little more tone along the bottom as the painting gets more done, more complete, but for now, looks pretty good. I said in the first segment, I wasn't sure I was not showing too much material over here for the overall composition, but I think I'm not. I think it works. I think this is still clearly maintaining status as a focal point. This is too bright, but I'm going to tone that down. This is secondarily bright, I like that, and the soft wintry glow in the sky I like. So, generally speaking, all's well. This is semi-dry, not completely. What I want to do next is paint out the porch area with that secondary light source glow, and then I'll bleed that down into the foreground, finish that out. If I can finish all of the foreground, the secondary elements, then hopefully this will be dry enough that I can paint at least the top of this element, to pull that forward just a little and really emphasize the contrast on our feature light source. Yeah, watercolor, it's the way I love to do it is really working everything up all at once, rather than painting one area and then coming back later. I try to do my entire painting in one sitting. That's all well and good, but it means sort of structuring your painting or pacing it out so that you're not constantly having to go back into a really wet area. Sometimes you want to, but often to revisit one area, it has to be relatively dry in order to hold any sort of edge, which is what's going on over here. This area is not 100% dry, but it's dry enough that it'll hold an edge so that I can just subtly indicate this other distant outbuilding, feather it into the landscape, so it'll subtly, I hope, emerge and not look too focal, but look sort of there but not there, and I think that it does. So that's fine. I think for all intents, this part of the painting is complete. I'm dragging my mental heels a little bit about the way to tone out this porch area. It's too light now, I know that, but I'm wondering if I should work some of these yellow tones into it. I think yes, but what I don't want is for it to look too much of a focal point. but I think I'll be fine. So I'm taking a smaller 1/8 inch flat, a bit more of the Naples yellow. And I'm going to add just a little of this warm tone around the light source itself. I think the key here is a very little will go a long way. I don't need to do too much of this. Again, I have a plan, an overall plan for this painting, but part of this is being designed as I go, a little experimental, a little improvisational. But any color you paint, even yellow, which tends to be the lightest of colors, will add value to your painting, values to your painting. So whatever you paint yellow on is what I'm saying, will end up looking a little darker. But it will obviously look a little more warm. And I think okay, not really what I had in mind, but I think it might be all right. I'm dropping bits of violet into the yellow to tone it down a little. I'm going for this truly subtle effect, which no medium is better suited for it than watercolor, but I'm not sure I'm always suited for it. I love subtlety in paintings when it's strong, when it's emotionally strong. When it just looks indecisive, I don't love it at all. But I think this is working. I've suggested some of this back steps up into the house. Again, the key here is to just keep it suggestive and not too explicit. But the dry brush technique and this very textured paper is really, I am convinced it was the way to go, because it's working to allow me to do that. So when the porch stops here, I'm using some violet, some altar blue. I'm going to bring it down over the fence area. All right, the key here now is to subtly blend in the foreground up to the porch. So go back to the 1/2 inch flat. Just 1 or 2 swipes of dry brush should be able to get me there. These kinds of effects are often very graphic if you're doing a big, busy cityscape or street scene. And although the effect is somewhat the same here, I want the feeling of it to be quite different. I want it to be much more subtle and quiet. So it's graphic, but subtly so, I hope. Not too strong. then just blending all the different areas of the painting together. So I like this, but I think this obviously is a little too graphic. So as it gets further from the house, I'll just knock some of that back. So it's there, but not quite so strong. The flat brush is brilliant for allowing me to do that. Even up here, I think. A little too much of this mojo going on. Yes, not so bad. I'm just glancing up now and then at my porch, and I think adding that little hint of yellow was the way to go. It's not too strong, but I can anticipate wanting to add a little bit of it in an even stronger way in my focal point window. So everything's working. This is a little busy, but I'm not concerned. As it dries, I'll either glaze over the foreground or do some more up painting to subtly blend in all of those tones. It looks fine now, but a little busy and a little jittery, which is the opposite of what I want. Paper towel, while that's wet, will help blend some of that to keep it subtle. And yeah, it's emerging. Not done yet, but it's getting much closer. So I think at this state, I do have to let it dry, not too much longer, just a few minutes. Then I'll come in and work on my focal area. That'll sort of inform how much more I need to do to the rest. But I don't think too much. I think we're getting there. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes.